Hi everyone, it's Nick. I'm back with another tier list. Today I'm going to be ranking Quentin Tarantino's movies from worst to best. Quentin Tarantino is a very interesting director. He's only made 9 movies so far. He plans on making 10. So I wanted to go through the different movies that he's made, and because some of them are better than others, and I want to dissect why I think some movies of his work better than other movies do. Because he's a very unique director. I know he's probably, in terms of name, one of the most recognizable directors in terms of style and quality as well too. So we can talk about all of that when I go through each of the movies. But before I do that, please do me a favor and like this video and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all new upcoming content. So let me just preface this list by going over the different tiers that I've set up. So at the bottom, we have expected a little more. This is the tier where I will put the Quentin Tarantino films that were, in my opinion, underwhelming overall, and that doesn't really stack up to the rest of his filmography. The tier above that, we're going to call Kill Bill, and I think that's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to really go into that. Above Kill Bill, we have the tier Pretty Good But. These are the films that are overall very high quality, very good Quentin Tarantino movies, but there's 1 or 2 issues I have with them that kind of really knock it down a tier, for me at least. The tier above that, the second to the last tier, is Loved It. These are just the Quentin Tarantino movies that I have a personal fondness for and that I really enjoy watching, and when it's on TV, I'll just turn it on and just leave it on the television. And there's really more positives to say about those movies than there are negatives, if there are any negatives. So for that reason, that's why that tier is the Loved It tier. And for the S tier, we have the Big Kahuna Burger tier. These are the films that I think are the creme de la creme of Quentin Tarantino's work. So those movies I think are just undoubtedly his best movies in terms of writing, in terms of directing, in terms of getting the performances out of the actors the way you want it, in terms of telling an interesting and unique story. So with that being said, let's get on to the tier list. Starting at the bottom of the tier list will be what Quentin Tarantino himself considers his worst film, Death Proof. Death Proof will be in the expected a little bit more tier. Death Proof is about a crazy psychopathic killer named Stuntman Mike. He's played by Kurt Russell, and the first half of the film he terrorizes these one group of ladies, and in the second half of the film he terrorizes a completely different group of ladies. But what's different is in the first half he ultimately succeeds in killing these women, but in the second half the women get their revenge and the women get the upper hand. The film itself was part of a Grindhouse double feature event that Quentin Tarantino and his longtime filmmaking collaborator and friend Robert Rodriguez, whose film was Planet Terror. And the idea was to bring back the old school film theater experience, meaning that the film was specifically designed and created to be played at a double feature event. So when you're watching the film, it kind of feels like empty. It feels like there's less story and character there than there should be. And the reason for that is because it's not trying to sell you on a complete story. It's trying to sell you on half of a theater experience and less about a story. Because the film is divided into 2 halves, with each half having completely different characters, there is a feeling that you don't get to grasp and hold on to the characterization and the story of those characters throughout the film. You're kind of stuck at one point, and you're kind of not satisfied with the way the original character's story plays out, and then you're introduced to brand new characters, which feels like a completely different movie in some respects. And so maybe that is part of the reason why you can't really connect to these characters as much as you can his other films. And also, this is a movie about a bunch of pretty ladies being attacked by like this crazy psychopathic guy, and I think the dialogue here is not on par with the rest of his films. And some of the shots, I mean, like the first shot is a pair of feet on a dashboard of a car. So that pretty much says everything you need to say about Death Proof. It's a fine movie. It's not even bad. It's just, I expected a little more. Now, the next tier we're going to tackle is Kill Bill. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory that the next film on this list is Kill Bill. Now, with that being said, Quentin Tarantino himself has said that he considers Kill Bill to be one movie because that was his initial plan, to be a one movie, like 4-hour long movie. But Harvey Weinstein talked him out of it, so he divided it into 2 different parts, Volume 1 and Volume 2. So for the sake of the tier list, this tier will only have Part 1 and Part 2, and I will talk about which one I like better. So I guess we'll start from worst to best. So for Kill Bill, the next movie on the list, the second to last movie that I think is his best film, is going to be Kill Bill Volume 2. Kill Bill is Tarantino's 4th film, and the film that feels most like a kung fu comic book. The action and production design is cool, violent, and slick. The story definitely has epic quality to it. The cast of characters across the board is phenomenal. It plays too much like a comic book and less like a grounded story. Kill Bill is more similar to a Marvel movie than it is a crime drama. The action is entertaining to watch, but so much of the action called for less creativity in unfolding the story. What do I mean by that? The bride just checks her names off the list and then eventually she succeeds in killing Bill. It's not much else going on in the film. So why do I have Part 2 below Part 1? It's mainly because I like Part 1 better. Why I think Part 1 is better than Part 2 is because of the fight at the end. I think the fight at the end is an extravagance of, kung fu action, which I think he succeeds in Kill Bill Volume 1 and doesn't really get there in Kill Bill Volume 2. The ending of Kill Bill Volume 1 had the most buckets of blood for many of years for a feature film. And Kill Bill Volume 2 does not have a sick fight like that at the end. It's a very subdued ending where she just goes to kill Bill. I mean, she goes to Bill's house and then eventually she kills them there, but it's a one-on-one kind of thing, and he's not necessarily the toughest adversary that she's faced to that point. I think all the other adversaries she's fought to get to Bill are more interesting than Bill himself, so when we get to Bill, it's kind of anticlimactic. I also thought the part number 2 where she punches through 6 feet of dirt was not that interesting, kind of cheesy, didn't really work for me. But Kill Bill is a really fun movie, so if you like Kill Bill, no harm, no foul. It's just not my personal favorite Quentin Tarantino movie. Next on the list is the tier Pretty Good But. Now, these are overall very good quality Quentin Tarantino films, but they all have 1 or 2 things that kind of really bother me and kind of stop it from loving the film like I should. So next on the list is going to be The Hateful Eight. The Hateful Eight kind of feels like a redux of Reservoir Dogs, but in like a Western setting. The film has a unique and colorful cast of characters. The film is about 8 terrible people that are trapped in this cabin in this blizzard. It takes place in 1870s Wyoming. The drama that unfolds in the film is that John Ruth, played by Kurt Russell, is bringing Daisy Domergue, a wanted criminal, to the hangman to hang. And when they're trapped in this cabin with all these other people, it's clear that one other person in the cabin is conspiring with Daisy Domergue. So the drama is who's working with Daisy. And it's a very interesting idea, and it definitely plays like a cool, Quentin Tarantino Western movie with the cast of characters stuck together and in this insane setting, and there's this specific, interesting, unique drama that's unfolding. You think this movie would be like a smash hit, like a knockout of the park. And plus, on the flip side, this film also had a very enjoyable theater experience that I even got to experience, which is the 70mm roadshow experience that Quentin Tarantino was trying to do for this film, where you got to see it on 70 millimeter, even though when I saw it, it wasn't really on a 70 millimeter screen itself, but nonetheless. And then also there was an intermission in the middle, which I thought was pretty unique and interesting for a film, and I really loved that experience. And I wish more films would do something like that, but they don't, and it's really unfortunate. So if I had to pick one thing that I loved about The Hateful Eight, it'd be the 70mm experience, where there was an intermission, and it actually felt like an old school theater experience film. And I loved that. I cannot get enough of stuff like that. But it's not higher than the rest of the films. Why is that? Well, there's a number of reasons. The beginning of the film is a lot better, in my opinion, than the second half of the film. The film is separated into chapters. I think there's 5 chapters overall. The first 3 chapters are great. The last 2 chapters really suck the life out of the film. The whole time you're wondering, oh, who's this? Who's that? What's going on? And then at the end of chapter 3, a revelation is revealed, a specific moment occurs that sets up chapter 4. And what chapter 4 is just a long, drawn-out flashback of information that we could have probably already deduced ourselves in that moment. So, spoiler alert, it turns out that all the men in the cabin that were already there, besides Bruce Dern, are working for Daisy Domergue and her older brother, that's played by Channing Tatum. So that's the kind of another thing that kind of brings it down. It's not like a unique thing where it's like one person's doing it for his specific motives. Oh no, they're all doing it and they all kind of have the same motive, which is not as interesting in my opinion. But then you get to that point, right, where you're like, oh, okay, they're all working for Daisy, or Channing Tatum's under the floor. Oh man, I wonder what's going to happen next. But instead of showing you what happens next, they bring out like a 20-25 minute flashback of what happened before Kurt Russell and Sam Jackson and Walton Goggins arrive to the cabin. But at that point, we could have already deduced that like they killed whoever was already at the cabin and stayed at the cabin until they arrived. So I don't know why we had to waste the second half of the film with all that needless information. And then we get back to chapter 5, and chapter 5 is actually really short, and it makes you realize, wow, like the second chapter 3 is over. Like there's only like a few more minutes left to the story. Like, this film could be a lot shorter, honestly. And then they hang Daisy Domergue at the very end, which kind of feels morbid, because she's all covered in blood, and they're all covered in blood too, so, I don't know, it kind of just felt very off-putting. And then they all die too, so it's kind of exactly like Reservoir Dogs, we can get to the ending of Reservoir Dogs later, but everyone dies at the end. It's kind of, you have nothing to really latch onto and care for, by the 5th chapter of the film. So for all those reasons, The Hateful Eight is going to be lower on the list than the other films. But if you like Hateful Eight, best of luck to you. The last film on the pretty good but tier, and will be the 6th film on the best Quentin Tarantino films list, will be what Quentin Tarantino himself considers his best film, and that is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So I find it interesting that Quentin Tarantino considers this to be his best film, and I kind of just want to chalk it up to recency bias, because I don't think by any stretch of the imagination this is Quentin Tarantino's best movie. What do I like about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? I like the dedication to Hollywood. I like the vibe that Quentin Tarantino lets out in the film. The film is much like a hangout movie, the way I consider Pulp Fiction to be a hangout movie. There's not really a dense plot. The story and the way you drive the interest from the story is hanging out with the characters. Not so much about a plot, but so much about getting to know these people. The film is about Rick Dalton, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his stuntman double, who's played by Brad Pitt. The film is really cool. There's, the Leo plot and there's the Brad Pitt plot. And those two plots are very different and unique in their own ways, so I find that very refreshing because not everyone's focused on the same thing in the film. Everyone has their own lives going on. I love the way the ending, how Quentin Tarantino sets up that big moment at the end that you are waiting for. I don't like how he narrates, like, the moment you've all been waiting for. I thought that was really hammy. And lastly, what I liked about the film is the colors. The colors in this film are great. The California sunlight is definitely different than East Coast sunlight, and I like the colors that he uses throughout the film, especially the neon light signs. But why is it pretty good? Because there's some hang-ups. I mean, the script's not all the way there. Leonardo DiCaprio's story, Rick Dalton, then his stuntman Brad Pitt, and then there's Margot Robbie, who plays Sharon Tate, who is very underdeveloped throughout the film. She's kind of just walking around and watching her own movies, while at the same time kicking up her bare feet in a movie theater. Quentin Tarantino, I think, fails at connecting the Manson murders into this story. He had Brad Pitt just go out to that ranch randomly for one moment, and they use that as an excuse to kind of tie it into them going to Rick Dalton's house at the very end, to the horrific Sharon Tate murder scene that ends up being at Rick Dalton's house, because it's revisionist history that Quentin Tarantino does. But I just felt like there wasn't the connection to Rick's story and his stuntman story, the connection that would lead to organically having that moment at the very end. I know Brad Pitt was at the ranch, but I felt like that was a weak way to connect the story. But if you like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's a really good movie. So the next tier is the Love It tier. The Love It tier is just, films that I love. They're not what I consider his best work, because I have personal favorites. Obviously, everyone does. So my personal favorites will be in the S tier, but the ones that aren't my personal favorites, but I still really like and don't really have that many gripes with them, will be in the Love It tier. So number 5, the bottom of the Love It tier, is Django Unchained. The best scene in the film is obviously the dinner table scene, where they look like they're going to succeed in their plot, but then Samuel Jackson reads it across the room and reveals their plan. The way the drama unfolds in that scene is very suspenseful and very interesting, and that's what you love about Quentin Tarantino's movies. Like, he's able to create these intense plot-driven moments that the characters are on the edge of their feet and the audience are on the edge of their feet at the same time. And I just love that scene so much. But then after that scene, the movie doesn't get as good as that scene. Django goes on a big shootout, but he gets captured, and then the rest of the movie is pretty standard. He escapes from his captors, and when he goes back to Candyland, it's not really hard for him. Once he escapes, he's kind of able just to booby trap the entire mansion and succeed at the very end and walk into the night with Brunhilde. I feel like the ending could have had like another element to it that would make the drama more intense, because once Django escaped, I felt pretty confident that Django was gonna live throughout the movie, and he does with relative ease. But I love Django Unchained, so if you like it, we're in agreement. The top of the Love It tier is Reservoir Dogs. Reservoir Dogs is considered Quentin Tarantino's first film. It's like, we've seen heist films before, but we've never seen a heist film like this, where it's just all the characters after the heist in one room. It's a very unique way to tell the story. And also, before this film, there wasn't dialogue in film the way that there is now. I think Quentin Tarantino changed the way screenwriters write dialogue in major motion pictures now. The dialogue is more conversational, which is really refreshing. It kind of makes you feel like you're talking to real people, real characters. Because it's all in one location, it kind of plays like a play, like a stage play. It does have a bottle movie-esque quality to it because they're all in one place. I guess a gripe would be it's too staged and blocked, But that's kind of the whole point because it's all in one location. I really love the ear cutting scene. I think it's iconic. I know Harvey Weinstein was trying to have Quentin Tarantino cut the ear cutting scene from the film when it was playing at festivals. And the reason behind that was because when it would go to the ear cutting scene, first of all, I thought it was done pretty tastefully, where the camera pans away to let your imagination be the source of the image of the ear cutting, and then it cuts back to the severed ear. I think that was done very tastefully, but it still bothered enough people to the point where there were people actually leaving the theater. And Harvey Weinstein told Quentin Tarantino, right now, this film with that scene is only a film for some people. But if you take away that scene, then it's a film for everybody. But then Quentin Tarantino thought about that. It's the best scene in the film, and it's personally his personal favorite scene in the film, and he knows it. And so he says, well, it's that movie. That was real testament to Quentin Tarantino, because that's your first film, and it's the big producer like Harvey Weinstein telling you, hey, and you see it too at the festivals, he sees the people walking out. He's like, hey, you see those people walking out, like, get rid of this scene, all our problems are solved. And then Quentin Tarantino says, well, no, that creates a problem because then it makes the movie dog shit. And I really respect Quentin Tarantino for that. The way the story unfolds, you get a glimpse into each character's life so that when they all butt heads at the very end, you kind of know where everyone's coming from. I kind of like how the ending's kind of left ambiguous. Like, what happened to Mr. Pink? Does Mr. White shoot Mr. Orange in the head? Do the cops shoot Mr. White? In my opinion, I think Mr. Pink probably gets arrested right outside the warehouse, maybe like down the road, 1 or 2 blocks away maybe. And then I think Mr. White shoots Mr. Orange in the head and then they shoot Mr. White. That's my personal take on the ending. Think about it however you like. That's what I'm going with, but that's the beauty about this ending. You can have your own interpretation, and it can totally make sense, which I think is a testament to a really good crafted story and a really good filmmaker in Quentin Tarantino. We are on the final tier, the Big Kahuna Burger. These are my personal favorite Quentin Tarantino movies. These are the films I think are top-notch. I think they're the creme de la creme. They are the best. They are the Tarantino-y of Tarantino. At number 3, we have Jackie Brown. Like everyone else who's a fan of Jackie Brown is a film that grew on me. I initially didn't have it on my 3rd place for Quentin Tarantino's best movies, but then I watched it again, and then I watched it again, and then I watched it again, and then you realize, oh wow, wait, this is actually one of his best movies. What is it about Jackie Brown that is so unique to the rest of his films? The rest of his films kind of take place in the Quentin Tarantino world. Everything, including the drama and the characters and the setting, is very heightened because that's what Quentin Tarantino calls for in his movies, because he's drawing from different other movies with heightened moments, and he kind of brings them in to create this world of heightened sensibilities and drama. In Jackie Brown, he doesn't have that. In Jackie Brown, it feels like the real world and feels less like the Quentin Tarantino world. Jackie Brown stars Pam Grier. The film is about Samuel Jackson's character is working with a bondsman. The bondsman gets people out of jail off of bond. So Samuel Jackson's character is working with the bondsman, Max Cherry, who's played by the late great Robert Forster, to get this guy out of jail. And he does that, and then Samuel Jackson ends up killing the guy because he's afraid he's going to rat on him. And then it cuts to Jackie Brown as a flight attendant, and then 2 cops, one of them is played by Michael Keaton, and they confront Jackie Brown, and they look through her bag, and they find cash, and it's apparent that Jackie Brown was helping smuggle money Samuel Jackson. But then they also find a little bit of drugs in there too, so that kind of really fucks Jackie. So now we're back in where we were in the beginning. Samuel Jackson is working with the bondsmen to post bond for Jackie, and now the idea is, hey, we saw him post bond for this other guy before, and then he killed him. He killed Chris Tucker. What's stopping him from killing Jackie Brown? As the audience, you're left thinking like, oh shit, now he's gonna kill Jackie because he just posted her bond. When Max Cherry, the bondsman, posts bond for Jackie Brown, it's kind of love at first sight, and he's kind of in love with Jackie Brown at that point. one thing leads to another, and then Jackie Brown gets the upper hand on Samuel Jackson's character, and then she and him develop a plan that rather than him killing her, she is going to help him with this next big score. And then that will even things out for them. Because then after that, I think the plan is to retire, not to do anything else after that, or whatever. But it's really just a setup so that the cops can get Samuel Jackson, while at the same time, her and Max Cherry can get the cash. So she's kind of playing both sides right now. She's playing both sides, and I think that's really interesting for a character like Jackie Brown to do. It's a very interesting protagonist, and Pam Grier just knocks out the park, and so does Robert Forster. And Robert De Niro is also in the film. He's kind of an afterthought, though. His character just adds an extra element to the story. But like I said, Jackie Brown's a phenomenal film. It's the one film that's outside of the Tarantino verse. It's one of the films that has the most realistic characters. It's the one film that probably has the most tragic ending of any of the films. Because, yes, they succeed in their plan, but Max still clearly loves Jackie Brown, and Jackie Brown's going away, and then, he gets a call on the phone and he has to take it. And then he's probably never going to see her again, and that's so tragic for thinking how much Robert Forster's character, in his eyes, you can see how much he really loves Jackie Brown. It's a unique, utterly fantastic Quentin Tarantino film. I cannot speak more highly of Jackie Brown. Definitely check out Jackie Brown. You won't regret it. At number 2, Inglourious Basterds. Inglourious Basterds is about a group of soldiers, Allied soldiers, mainly Americans, in World War II, and their plan is, in another revisionist history event, to blow up a cinema where there will be a premiere of a German film, propaganda film, and Adolf Hitler will be attending the premiere. So the plan is to blow up the premiere and kill the Führer. Probably the most dramatically epic film out of all of his films. Kill Bill is more sensationally epic, where I think Inglourious Basterds is more dramatically epic, for lack of a better phrase or terminology. What do I like about Inglourious Basterds? Well, pretty much everything. I think Quentin Tarantino sets up his movies sometimes in chapters, or if they're not chapters, they're title cards. Like in Reservoir Dogs, it was Mr. White's title card, Mr. White's flashback, Mr. Blonde's title card, Mr. Blonde's flashback, Mr. Orange flashback. In Hateful Eight, there's Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and I think his chapter system that he works in some films are better in some films than other films, and I think Inglourious Basterds is a film where his chapter system works the best, because each of those chapters feel so uniquely distinct from each other that I feel like a page break or a chapter break is necessary to fit the tone and the theme for each scene. In Hateful Eight, even though it's separated by chapters, the drama from one chapter is still lifted and important to the second chapter. Whereas each chapter in Inglourious Basterds kind of works as their standalone short film. The opening scene in Inglourious Basterds is the best opening scene in any Quentin Tarantino film. Any film where the shot goes through the floorboards and you're revealing information to the audience is going to be super interesting. And the performances also I really like. I understand people's complaints about Brad Pitt's accent in the film. I mean, it works. I think even though it's maybe not entirely authentic, it works for the character and the tone of the story. So he doesn't have to have the correct draw on his words, but if he has but by talking like that, you create a certain characterization of a character that the audience would feel regardless. I guess if you're really from that area, it might be really off-putting, but for the general movie-going audience, it's really not a big deal at all. There's two parallel stories that kind of culminate together separately, but it still works in the end because they reach the same end goal at the same time. So it's not as messy as I would say how Once Upon a Time in Hollywood had parallel storylines that met together at the end. But the problem is with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I felt like that meeting together was not earned. Inglourious Basterds also has parallel storylines that sort of meet at the very end, but I feel like that meeting together is much more earned because Shoshana's half of the story is really set up very well, and she also has the motivations and the same desires to blow up the premiere. So it makes perfect sense that they would blow up the premiere together at the same time. They don't even coordinate it; it kind of just happens that way. But it's more earned that way when you set up the character from the jump that she wants this to happen, or you can see her wanting this to happen in the future. Chapter 4, the scene in the bar, is so well crafted in terms of writing and dialogue. The drama unfolds so organically because you're left thinking, okay, I guess like Michael Fassbender is like this new character into the story, but then they kill him like instantly. I wonder like after what happened here, how the rest of the story is going to unfold. And it's interesting how in the second half, Bridget von Hammersmark just like dies instantly once her use is done to get into the theater. The ending, I also love the ending. I love how it ends. It's so fitting for the story. But I just thought that was a very retrospective ending that was very, very interesting. I have a completely new appreciation for this film. It's a fantastic film. I highly recommend Inglourious Basterds. At the top of the Quentin Tarantino tier list, Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction is Quentin Tarantino's claim to fame. This is the film that made him a big star. It won him his first Oscar for original screenplay. It's his most unique film by a mile. What's good about Pulp Fiction? The film is about these two gangsters who are essentially hitmen, and they work as gangsters for this guy named Marcellus Wallace. The film is about their life working for him, and it's also about this boxer who throws a fight and then is trying to leave the country, but before he leaves the country, he has to go back to his apartment to get his sentimental gold watch. The film is unique because how Quentin Tarantino sets up his films in different chapters, so does he set up this film in different chapters. There's the part where Vincent's taking Mia Wallace on a date. There's the part where Butch, the boxer, tries to, played by Bruce Willis, who's fantastic by the way, tries to go and get back his gold watch. And then there's the end of the film, which turns out to be the beginning of the film. And it's about what happens after two hitmen kill someone. What's the rest of their day like? It's a fantastic film. It's fantastic because of the story structure. This is a non-linear film. The film is told out of order in terms of chronological events. Spoiler alert, John Travolta dies like halfway through the film, but then he's in the last shot because the ending of the film is before John Travolta dies. And that's like a unique head trip when you're a moviegoer. You're like, whoa, like why are you telling the story this way? But it works thematically to tell a story this way because the themes and the importance of drama intensifies throughout the film. So at first it's just a date. You're taking the boss's girl out on a date. You have to make sure you don't touch her or anything. Then it's like, oh, in the second half, but then she gets overdosed, and like obviously that's a dramatic and a big concern. Then you get to the second part. It's like, oh, you threw the fight, they're after you. Oh, but you have to go back to your apartment and get the watch. Oh, are they there? Like, is it safe to go back to the apartment? That's an intensification of drama. So that makes more sense for that part to be in the second half of the film. And then the third part is about two hitmen that kill a guy and then they go through the rest of their day. But before they go through the rest of their day, they almost got shot and died by a guy that was hiding in the kitchen. And now Jules' character, played by Samuel Jackson, is going through a spiritual crisis where he's thinking like he doesn't want to do this anymore and he wants to hang up his coat. That is an existential. It's not as intense, but it's an existential spiritual crisis that's thematically more dense and more serious than the first two chapters, so it makes perfect dramatic sense for that part to be at the end. And I like how everything goes full circle, like the first scene of the film ties into the last scene of the film. This is a really good hangout movie because you're just hanging out with the specific characters. Like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the story is about spending time with these people, which if you're able to pull that off successfully is where you get some of the best films. And lastly, this is Quentin Tarantino's funniest movie. I mean, this movie is hysterical. He wrote it as a comedy. It's a crime comedy, so it's unique and fresh. There's elements of intense drama, but then the character cracks a joke that is, you can't help but like crack a smile in a very intense situation. So the juxtaposition of those elements is really fascinating and really entertaining to watch. That's it. Pulp Fiction is number 1 on my list. Pulp Fiction being number 1 is probably the standard conventional opinion, but how would you rank Quentin Tarantino's movies? Do me a favor and comment down below your ranking, and do me another favor and like this video and subscribe to the channel so you stay up to date on all new upcoming content. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.